Hey everyone, Sycra here, and in this video I want to go over this question, which is, what are the fundamentals in art? What does that mean? Because I've said it and other people have said you got to learn your fundamentals, and what are they? And what do I need to study? So I made this chart, and basically it goes over a few different art jobs, not all of them of course, but just a few different types. Animator, architect, character designer, concept artist, creature designer, illustrator, landscape painter, manga or comic artist, portrait artist, and storyboard artist. And then I have a list of the fundamentals. And then it also shows, what amount of skill do you need to, in that thing for that specific career. So for instance, a character designer, well, proportion and placement, you'll notice all of them require proportions at a very high level. But for character designer, you don't really need a whole lot in terms of composition knowledge, because you're just doing characters side by side, right? Maybe turnarounds and things. So that's not that important. But then if you were a landscape painter, you need a lot of skill in composition. So I want to go over in more detail now each one of the fundamentals and what they are, and how to learn them. So the first one, and the most important one in my opinion, is proportion and placement. Now these following ones are all going to be what I consider to be drawing. So when I say drawing, I'm not just talking about, well, you get a pencil or a pen and you're drawing lines and things. To me, drawing is this stuff. It's getting proportion and form and things down. And painting, the way I think of it, is you already have a solid drawing and now you're rendering it. You're adding tone, you're adding color, and those are the painting skills, I guess. So the biggest drawing skill to me is proportion and placement. That's the ability to draw something in the right proportion. The head is the right size compared to the body. And placement, where you put the things, right? Measuring angles, being able to draw what you see. And there's two really good things that I would suggest if you want to learn this quickly. Now, the easiest one, but it takes a while, is to actually just practice drawing a whole lot, and you will get better at proportion and placement. But I really like the Betty Edwards book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, at least in the beginning, because it's good for beginners who never have drawn and who don't really understand that they're even having proportion mistakes in their work. This tends to correct it. But then if you want to go more advanced and you really want to nail down your proportions, doing bark drawings will help. And it's basically they're drawings by this guy called Charles Barg, and you try and make the drawing exactly like what you see, to the most minute detail. And if you ever have been to or you've seen atelier work, this is often what they're taught, and it's helpful to have a teacher or a guide who is at a higher level than you, who can correct you. But if not, you can do tricks. For instance, you take a photo of your drawing and then you overlay it with a photo of the actual thing, and they got to line up perfectly. So I'm not going to be able to explain everything about, what is bark drawing and where do you get the books and things, because I think it's very important for artists to seek out knowledge. And I'm here to sort of tell you, well, in this direction there's this thing, but then it's kind of up to you to go that way if you want to, because I can't just hold your hand and take you the whole way, right? So yeah, I would encourage you, for instance, if you're not familiar with what bark drawing is, to look it up. Okay, so the next one is form and construction, and that's the ability to break things down into their basic component shapes, or to start from basic shapes like the cube, cone, cylinder, and sphere, and then build up. And when you see these mannequin figures, that's basically what it is. It's used a lot in animation because you want to see the figure in 3 dimensions. And this ties in with the next skill, which is perspective. Now, I was going to put form and construction together with perspective because it does help to have both. But I do know people who they don't have the best perspective, but they're still okay with form and construction. And so, I mean, I would feel bad to say you must know really good perspective to be able to have form in your work. But it definitely helps. And I've recommended this series before by Marshall Vandruff. It's very good with perspective. You can also read books to get that. Loomis, Andrew Loomis has a few books that cover perspective. And another thing you can do is just use 3D programs, because what 3D programs are doing is it sort of gets you to see three-dimensional objects from many different angles over and over again. And that can help build sort of a perspective grid in your mind. You'll get used to seeing what looks right and what looks wrong. Next thing is anatomy, and this is a big one, especially if you want to do, character design, anything with people or even animals. It's very helpful to have anatomical knowledge. Now, I've recommended books before, and if you go to my site, Sycra.net, and you go to the resources section, scroll all the way down, there's a bunch of recommended books. But if I was to tell myself how to learn anatomy from scratch again, I would just pretty much rely on 2 things. One is Le Corset, and if you look to the right, you'll see this figure, and it's got its things colored, and that's just an app for the iPad. Beside it is the actual sculpture, but it's an app for the iPad which just labels the muscles, and you can spin this figure around, and I find it very useful just because I can turn it around. Usually when you have a book, yeah, you're looking at an image, but you don't really know, but what does it look like underneath? How does that connect and where? And then the other thing I like to do is just type in the name of the muscle into Google. And on the left side, you'll see 3 images. And those are just pulled up from Google because I typed in pectoralis major. And because you're seeing multiple images, it's giving you a better idea of oh, okay, so that's what it looks like, or that's where it is. And here's another thing that's very important to know, is that when you pick up a book and it's anatomy by the artist or things, they often get names wrong, names of muscles or even placement, and I do too. And it's this thing of, we're not scientists, or we're not medical students, and even medical students, maybe the drawing isn't so good. So what I find helpful about Google is you just type in the thing, go into the images, and then look at a bunch of different images, so you can sort of get a sense of the patterns instead of just following one specific thing, and maybe it's calling the muscle the wrong name, or it's showing it connect a little bit wrong. So that's just my advice on that subject. So for anatomy, again, study books, and Le Corset is great if you have an iPad. Maybe there's other things. I have also a sculpture and a skeleton, but I found the iPad thing is better because it's color-coded, the muscles, and you can spin it around. Next thing is gesture, and this is really, really, really stressed in animation and not stressed much in anything else, but it is important because it brings life to your work. And the way to learn this is you can study animators or animation. Here, just even if you type in gesture drawing in Google, you'll find a bunch of stuff. I personally really like the gestures of guys like Ryan Woodward or Glenn Keane, who are both animators. And then the other thing to do is just figure drawing, look for lines of action, look for gesture, and push it, exaggerate poses and things. So to me, this is a fundamental. Maybe to someone else this isn't a fundamental, but I'm just going over what I consider to be my picks for the fundamentals in art. And when I say fundamentals, it doesn't mean that you learn all the fundamentals and then you're good to go. It's like, no, you learn the fundamentals and now that's your basis to build on top of. So next is composition. And I think the best way to learn composition, well, there's a really good book called Framed Ink, and so I included that. That's very good for learning composition, but a lot of it is just master studies. So I have some paintings at the top by really artists I consider master painters. And then you can also look at movies, because movies tend to have really good compositions. And so study those. And yeah, I think that's mainly it for composition. And again, look at many different compositions at the same time and look for patterns that emerge, because that can help more than if you're just studying one picture for a really long time. Because when you just study one picture for a really long time, what happens is you just get used to, or not even used to, but you start getting into the copying mode where you're just analyzing what they did. Whereas when you look at many images or you do really quick short studies, then you're getting more of, well, what am I seeing often? What are the patterns? And that's what I think is better to study. Okay, so now we're into the painting skills. And first one is values. And a good way to get better at values, well, I made this game called the Value Game, and if you search on YouTube for the Value Game, you'll probably be able to find that. So that's one way. But the other way that I find is really good is to do still lifes and use charcoal. You can use pencil, but what I like about charcoal is that you can get really, really dark, but also very light. So basically you set up this thing in front of you, a still life, and then you just draw from life, and it trains your eyes to get good at value. You could also do it on a computer or a tablet. It doesn't have to be from life. You can also just study photos. And with studying photos, the advantage, if it's on the computer, is you can actually color pick to make sure, not to color pick the value, but just you guess what the value is, and then you just use the eyedropper tool to check how close you are to the real thing, and then you can adjust it. But yeah, that's my recommendation for values. It's not easy, but it's something, like for me, I think I got pretty decent with values in a month, and I was spending around 12 hours a day just doing still life studies. And at first it was very difficult, and I was squinting my eyes a lot. And I have a video called How Painters Use Squinting, and that goes over that in more detail. But yeah, being able to see things in their correct values, super important fundamental skill. And then finally, color theory, which I think it's a big topic, and I really like Richard Schmidt books for this. He has a book called Alla Prima, Everything I Know About Painting, and now he's come out with Alla Prima 2, or it's been out for a little while now, actually. And then Nathan Fowkes, he has a schoolism course on color theory, which is very good as well. But you can also learn this by doing life studies again. They're very good. Although very difficult, especially if you're starting out. Give yourself a lot of room to make mistakes and screw up, because it is really difficult, or at least for me, it was really difficult to look at something and then pick colors, because what was so strange is I would look at the thing and I'd be painting it, and it would almost feel like the colors are shifting all the time. And that's because you put down a color, but then you put down a color beside that color, and now you have a relationship of two colors, and if that relationship is wrong, then it doesn't matter what color you originally picked. So, again, I'm not really going into details on how to learn these fundamentals. I'm just doing a quick overview of how to learn them, because all of them are very in-depth, and how many do we have? I think we have, like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 fundamentals that I have, and each one is, it's tough, you know. Each one takes a while to get good at. So yeah, I'll put up this chart on my site, and then on Sycra.net, you can go into the resources, and I'll include a link in the description, and you can see sort of, what you need to learn. Now there's some deceptively simple things. For instance, for architect, you see the skill required for perspective is high, but it's actually very high. It's higher than, let's say, a concept artist perhaps, or an illustrator, although for them they need to know perspective as well. And an animator, it looks like when you look at animator, it's like, okay, so you really need to know your proportion and placement, you really need to know forming, construction, anatomy, and gesture, but you don't need as much knowledge in perspective or composition and values in color theory. If you're just an animator, like, maybe it helps for knowing where the lights and the shadows go, but it's not like imperative. Usually in animation, you have the guy doing at least in classical animation, you have someone doing the drawing, but then someone else who handles coloring and the backgrounds and things. But I would say out of all these, animator is by far the hardest in terms of like the amount of skills you need to know. And it's just not the fundamental skills. There's skills on top of the fundamentals, which is what I was getting at before, where the fundamentals are really, that's your foundation. That's what you build your house on. But then you can have a really nice foundation and a very simple house, but animation is not that. Animation is like this crazy complicated manor or a castle or something. It's just, anyway. So hopefully this helps you understand what the fundamentals are, and hopefully what you need to study